Well, hello, greetings. We're live now. My name is Rob Prince, and I'm here to interview my former colleague and friend, Dr. Nader Hashemi. And the reason for the interview is that there's an upcoming conference here in Denver. It's called Iran, the Nuclear Deal in a Rapidly Changing Middle East. It's sponsored by a number of groups, a coalition that's come together. The overarching group calls itself Coloradans for Middle East Diplomacy and Peace. It includes the Friends Committee on National Legislation, J Street, the National Iranian-American Council. So I want to welcome you, Nader, to this interview. Appreciate your taking the time to do it. And for starters, a question: why should people in Colorado be concerned about the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, because if there's no Iran nuclear deal, the likelihood of another Middle Eastern war is very much a reality. If you look at just what's been happening in the last several months, in the dying days of the Trump administration, there's been an attempt really to provoke Iran into a war, claiming that its nuclear program is out of control. Last year at this time, the United States assassinated Iran's top general. At the end of November, the United States and Israel were responsible for assassinating Iran's top nuclear scientist. The New York Times reported in November that Trump had a consultation with his foreign policy advisors about military options that he could use against Iran. There's been a series of attacks on Iran's key economic and nuclear sites. B-52 bombers are flying in the vicinity. So, this is an administration that has a particular Iran obsession. And of course, this is an administration that's being goaded and encouraged by a number of countries in the Middle East, primarily Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, to launch a war against Iran. So the prospects of a Middle Eastern war are very serious at this moment. And of course, if there is a war, people in Colorado are going to be affected, not only economically, but if troops are sent to the Middle East, Coloradans will be in harm's way. I think much more fundamentally, I'd like to think that Colorado is a state where politicians and citizens have an ethical view of the world, an ethical foreign policy, where we don't want to be contributing to international destabilization. And so for all of these reasons, I think Coloradans should care about the state of U.S.-Iran relations.
Here in Colorado, we do have a tradition of peace. We had the Rocky Flats movement to close it down. When the war against Iraq started, there are actually resolutions in the Denver City Council, in the Boulder City Council, calling for peace. But I have a question for you. The contrast between the way that the Trump administration has dealt with the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the way that the Obama administration that negotiated has dealt with it is really rather striking. Can you briefly talk about, why did Obama sign that deal, and why is it? Well, you already mentioned why it's important, but could you talk about that contrast a little bit?
Yeah, the contrast is different, but at the same time, there's a shared sense that, look, Iran is a threat. Iran is a destabilizing player, which is all true. The question is, how big of a destabilizing player is it in the Middle East? If you listen to the folks in the Trump administration, they have taken this radical view that they believe that Iran is the source of instability, not only in the Middle East, but in the entire world. So that's a huge exaggeration. There are many other countries and actors in the Middle East that have contributed to the destabilization of the region, not just various Arab authoritarian regimes, but the state of Israel. They need to own their own share of responsibility. Both administrations had a view that, look, Iran is a danger, is a threat The question is, how do you best deal with it? The Trump administration's view is, let's try and topple the regime, let's squeeze it, let's try and sort of put maximum pressure on it, hoping there'll be some sort of domestic uprising, and in the aftermath, you would get some sort of pro-American, pro-Israeli regime. The Obama team had a much more sober and I think much more accurate analysis of the best way to deal with Iran's nuclear program and its destabilization of the region, and that is to, use diplomacy to try and enter an agreement where Iran's nuclear program will be put under international inspection, and in exchange, Iran would get sanctions relief. And then hoping that would then sort of open the door for greater diplomacy and integration of Iran into the region, and perhaps even create better internal social conditions for the struggle for democracy. So this nuclear agreement that was signed in 2015, most Americans don't know this, but around the world, it was celebrated. There was serious talk of John Kerry and Javad Zarif getting the Nobel Peace Prize. It's only really in the United States and in Israel and Saudi Arabia where there was disagreement, but everyone else, really celebrated this agreement as a major step forward for international peace and security. So that's basically the difference between the two administrations, and Biden wants to take us back to the Obama period.
Do you think that that the Biden administration is going to be able to return the United States to the Iran nuclear deal? And if so, what do you see the consequences of that?
Both, Biden has openly stated that he wants to do that. The senior leadership in Iran has openly stated that they want to do that. There's big challenges, I think, that exist on both sides. What I'm hearing here in the United States is American hawks, people like the notorious Elliot Abrams, have been making arguments to the Obama foreign policy team, such as the following: let's not rush into anything. Time is on our side. It's not on the side of the Iranians. They can't withstand 4 years of maximum pressure. Let's try and push them to get a better deal, to talk about their missile program, to talk about their other, behavior in the region. That's what that I think perspective is going to be, I suspect, considered by some of the foreign policy, people around the Biden team, because it sounds very convincing. It sounds like the United States really is in the driver's seat. So, there's going to be an internal debate. As far as I know, the Biden team is very committed to sort of signing back onto the agreement, as is the Iranian side. And of course, we don't have a lot of time because Iran has is increased its enrichment. It's trying to put pressure on the Americans. There's also going to be an election in Iran. Of course, not a free and fair election, but there could be a changing of the guard. And if you have more hardliners in power in Iran, particularly in the presidency, that's going to make diplomacy much more difficult. So I'm optimistic that one of the first foreign policy decisions, the big decision that Biden will make, is to sort of quickly sign back onto the Iran nuclear agreement on the condition that Iran fulfill its terms as well. And both countries have stated that. So in that sense, there's room for optimism.
All right, that's true. And the way that this agreement is discussed often, Nader, is it makes it sound like it's an agreement just between Iran and the United States. That's a bit deceptive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's an international agreement in the sense that, it's not just Iran and the United States. It's, the major, members of the permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. So having said that, it should also be pointed out that this agreement has been enshrined and upheld in the context of international law by virtue of a very important UN Security Council resolution that was voted on unanimously by the entire UN Security Council. But having said that, it's also important to point out that the key players in this agreement are really Iran and the United States. Yeah. Other countries are supportive of it, but it's important to highlight, I think, its international dimensions and its international law dimensions as well.
Okay, so moving on to the January 21st conference that you're going to be participating in. Can you tell us just briefly a little bit about some of the speakers in this conference?
Yeah, just to clarify, it's more of a panel discussion than a conference.
Panel discussion, right.
So there's some pretty important people that we'll be hosting. Perhaps the most important and distinguished voice on the panel will be Trita Parsi, who is, the co-founder of this new institute, Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He was also the founder of the National Iranian-American Council. But I think Trita's credentials really are a byproduct of his academic scholarship on the topic. He has written 3 important books, all published by Yale University Press, on Iranian foreign policy, the last one dealing specifically with the nuclear negotiations, called Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Triumph of Diplomacy. So in many ways, Trita is, in my view, one of the world's leading experts on the topic of U.S.-Iran relations. We also have a representative, Hassan Al-Tayyib, from the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is a Quaker lobbying group, lobbying for more just and ethical U.S. foreign policy. We've got Barbara Slavin, who is the director of the Iran Project at the Atlantic Council. And we also have a representative from J Street, Dylan Williams, who's the senior vice president for policy and strategy for J Street. And I'll be moderating the discussion.
Right. So for those people who would like to join us on this, the best way to do this is, at this point, the Coloradans for Middle East Diplomacy and Peace. We have a Facebook page, and on that Facebook page, you should register. I think, I'm new at these productions, but I think that there's a banner that's going across here that also gives, across our interview, that gives people the site where you can register. So we hope, we're anticipating this is going to be a major conference. And of course, I want to emphasize personally that this is an open window that we have not seen or had in terms of U.S. Middle East peacemaking really for some time, and we have to take advantage of it. And in terms of the roadblocks that Nader was discussing, particularly in Congress, the different elements that are going to oppose this, and we know they are. This also makes very, very important the public support for the Biden. The Biden administration needs to know that the people of the United States are behind him in doing this. So we look forward to a big conference, to a successful conference. Nader, I look forward to your remarks during that conference, and thank you so much for this interview. Nader Hashemi, Executive Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver's Korbel School of International Studies.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate your hard work.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
You too.